The silence was the first sign of invasion, long before the orbital defense platforms registered the inbound masses, before the panicked communiques began to stutter across the Sol system. The silence arrived. On Triton, Neptune's largest moon, the raucous energy of the cryo-mining facilities simply ceased. One moment, the system-wide net was alive with the chatter of roughnecks, the drone of plasma drills, and the incessant hum of atmospheric processors. The next, there was nothing. No distress call, no final scream, just an abrupt and total cessation of all transmission. The military dispatched a recon fleet, expecting pirate activity or a catastrophic reactor failure. What they found was a world still perfectly intact, its cities gleaming under the faint light of a distant sun, its machinery still running, but its 8 million inhabitants were gone. In their place were the fungi. A phosphorescent, chartreuse-colored growth pulsed in the streets, climbing the walls of the habdomes and smothering every surface in a living, breathing carpet. The reconnaissance Marines who landed didn't last long enough to report their findings. Their suit cameras broadcasted a few minutes of harrowing footage images of the pulsating growth, of strange, spore-releasing stalks that resembled grotesque flowers, and finally, of their own comrades stiffening, their eyes glazing over as a fine green dust settled on their visors before they turned their weapons on each other. Then, like Triton itself, their channels went silent. That was how the Cathar War began, not with a bang, but with a creeping, inexorable hush that slowly began to suffocate humanity. The Cathar, as they were eventually named by a terrified xenolinguist who went mad trying to decipher their non-language, were not conquerors in any sense humanity understood. They had no ships, only continent-sized, pitted asteroids composed of organic matter that tumbled through the void, propelled by some unknown biological process. They had no soldiers, only the relentless, patient spores that rode the solar winds. Their invasion was an infection, a plague upon the stars, and humanity's vast arsenal of kinetic weapons, plasma cannons, and nuclear warheads was as useless as screaming at a tide. You couldn't bomb a spore, you couldn't shoot a fungus. For 2 years, humanity fell back, ceding the outer planets and their moons, abandoning trillions of dollars in infrastructure and billions of lives to the silent green tide. A quarantine line was established just beyond the orbit of Mars, a desperate gambit of minefields and patrol fleets, but everyone knew it was a temporary measure. The spores were already in the system, invisible and insidious. The war was already lost. All that remained was the final, silent surrender. Gaur, Eris Thorn felt the silence in his bones. It had been his companion for the last decade, living with him in the self-imposed exile of a decommissioned asteroid observatory orbiting a dead dwarf star in the Kuiper Belt. He had fled there after the Elysium incident, after his name became a curse whispered in the halls of every bioresearch division in the Federation. He had sought the quiet vacuum of deep space to escape the screams that still echoed in his memory, the screams of Subject Zero. He was charting the gravitational fluctuations of dark matter when the ship arrived, its clean, military lines and aggressive silhouette a jarring intrusion into his penitent solitude. A single shuttle detached and docked with his aging station, the clang of the magnetic clamps sounding like a death knell. He knew who it was before the airlock even hissed open. Only one person in the universe would have the authority and the sheer audacity to find him here. General Eva Rostova stood in the entryway, her dress uniform immaculate, her face a mask of granite and resolve that had been carved by decades of brutal decisions. She was the supreme commander of the Federation fleet, the woman tasked with managing humanity's extinction, and she looked at Eris not with contempt for his past, but with the cold, pragmatic eye of a craftsman finding a rusted but necessary tool. "We are losing. Eris," she said, her voice devoid of pleasantries. "Triton, Titan, Io, Ganymede. The Mars quarantine is a joke. Our projections give us 18 months before the first spores reach Earth's atmosphere. We've tried everything. Fire, radiation, chemical agents. Nothing stops the assimilation." Eris turned his back on her, staring out the reinforced viewport at the endless black. "Then we're finished. You can't fight a biological imperative with bullets. I told the Council that 10 years ago when they wanted to weaponize xenoflora, they didn't listen." Rostova's footsteps were heavy on the metal deck behind him. "They're listening now. I have been granted full executive authority. The old ethical mandates have been suspended. I am reactivating your work. I'm reactivating Project Chimera." A cold dread, colder than the space outside, washed over Eris. He felt the phantom sensation of blood on his hands, heard the ghostly echo of a mind shattering under the strain of his creation. "No," he breathed, the word barely a whisper. "Absolutely not. You have no idea what you're asking. Chimera wasn't a weapon. It was an abomination. It doesn't just rewrite DNA. It breaks the mind. It shatters the very foundation of what it means to be human." Rostova was unmoved. What it means to be human is about to be redefined as a fungal substrate. The Cathar are a hive mind, a single, unified consciousness spread across trillions of individual organisms. We can't fight them on a physical level, but you believed we could fight them on a psychic one. You designed a retrovirus to unlock humanity's latent psionic potential, to create a mind capable of interfacing with a hive, of disrupting it from the inside. A human weapon. I created a monster. Eris spun around, his face pale with fury and remembered terror. Subject Zero Captain Valerius, he was the best of us. A decorated soldier, a mind of unparalleled stability, and the virus turned him into a demigod of madness. He tore the Elysium station apart with his thoughts because he couldn't handle the influx of information, the sheer scale of a connected consciousness. He killed 300 people before the failsafe incinerated the entire station. You want to repeat that? You want to unleash that on a dying world? Rostova's expression didn't flicker. Valerius was the wrong host. Your own final report stated that his genetic markers for empathy and individuality were too strong. The virus amplified his identity until his ego shattered under the pressure of becoming part of something larger. You theorized that the perfect host would need to be a tabula rasa, a blank. Eris stared at her, horrified. Blanks are a statistical anomaly. 1 in a billion, a human born with no discernible genetic predispositions, no deep-rooted identity. They're theoretical. Rostova allowed herself a thin, cruel smile. Not anymore. We found one. The journey to the new facility was a silent, grim affair. Eris was escorted back to the inner system, to a secret location buried deep beneath the ice of Antarctica. A black site so far off the books it didn't have a name, only a designation, the Menagerie. It was a sterile, cold place, a tomb dedicated to the most forbidden sciences humanity had ever conceived. Here, under Rostova's iron-fisted command, the ethical boundaries Eris had once respected were nothing but dust. He was given a lab, a team of specialists who looked at him with a mixture of fear and reverence, and access to his old research. The Chimera virus, dormant for 10 years, was thawed from cryostasis. It looked harmless, a vial of clear liquid, But Eris knew it held the power to either save humanity or create a hell far worse than anything the Cathar could imagine. For weeks, he worked, refining the sequencing, building in new safeguards and psychic dampeners based on the fatal flaws he'd discovered with Subject Zero. He worked in a fugue state, driven by the ghost of his past failure and the crushing weight of his species' future. He told himself he was doing it to prevent another Elysium, to ensure that if Rostova forced this path, the resulting explosion would be as contained as possible. Deep down, he knew he was also fascinated, and the science was seductive, the challenge intoxicating. He was on the verge of forcing 1,000,000 years of evolution into a single, terrifying leap. And the scientist in him couldn't resist the pull of the abyss. He never asked about the host. He didn't want to know. It was easier to think of them as a variable, a component, not a person. But the day came when Rostova summoned him to an observation chamber overlooking a stark, white cell. "Meet the candidate," she said simply. Inside the cell was a young woman, no older than 20. She was thin and wiry, with cropped, dark hair and eyes that burned with a fierce, cornered animal intelligence. She sat on the edge of a simple cot, watching them through the one-way glass as if she could feel their gaze. Her name was Lena. She was a scavenger from the orbital shantytowns of Mars, a product of the war's periphery. She had spent her life picking through the bones of abandoned colonies, surviving on her wits and a cynical disregard for authority. She also had a peculiar knack for survival, an almost preternatural ability to sense danger, to find hidden caches of supplies, to know which crumbling structures would hold and which would fall. It wasn't until a Federation patrol picked her up for smuggling that a routine genetic scan flagged her as the impossible, a perfect blank. Eris felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a soldier like Valerius, hardened and prepared for sacrifice. This was a child, a survivor who had been dragged into a nightmare she couldn't comprehend. He saw the defiance in her posture, but he also saw the fear trembling just beneath the surface. "She's just a kid," Eris whispered, his voice hoarse. "She's our only hope," Rostova countered, her tone absolute. Her lack of a defined ego, her fluid identity, forged by a life of constant adaptation, makes her the only one who might survive the transformation. Her mind won't shatter. It will bend. It will become what it needs to be. "It will erase her," Eris argued, his voice rising. "Whatever she is now will be gone, replaced by what? A living weapon, a psychic puppet, a savior," Rostova said, turning away from the window. "Prepare the infusion. We begin in 1 hour." The final moments were a surreal tableau of clinical horror. Lena didn't fight or scream as the guards strapped her into the medical chair in the center of Eris's lab. She just watched him with those piercing, intelligent eyes, her expression a silent accusation and that cut him deeper than any knife. He could see the rapid pulse in her neck, the slight tremor in her hands, but her face was a mask of stoic resignation. She had been a survivor her whole life. This was just one more thing to be survived. Eris stood with the injector in his hand, the clear liquid of the chimera virus seeming to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. His team of specialists monitored a bank of screens displaying Lena's vitals, their faces grim. General Rostova observed from behind reinforced glass, her arms crossed, her patience wearing thin. This was it, the culmination of his life's work, the ghost of his greatest failure, and the last, desperate gamble of a dying species, all resting on the needlepoint he held poised over the young woman's arm. He looked into Lena's eyes one last time, trying to offer an apology, A warning. Something. But no words came. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be a lie. He was about to destroy her to save everyone else. With a trembling hand, hating himself, hating Rostova, hating the silence that was consuming the universe. Dr. Eris Thorne pressed the injector against her skin and pushed the plunger. The process of humanity's salvation, or its ultimate damnation, had begun. The virus did not enter Lena's system gently. For a heart-stopping 12 seconds, nothing happened. The monitors displayed her vitals, steady and unchanged, and Eris felt a flicker of absurd hope that the serum was a dud, that his decade of work had decayed into inert fluid. Then, the seizure began. It was not a thrashing, violent fit, but a terrifying, rigid paralysis. Every muscle in Lena's body locked simultaneously, her back arching against the restraints with a force that should have snapped her spine. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at a point on the ceiling as if witnessing the birth of a new god. The alarms on the medical console screamed in a unified chorus. Her heart rate spiked to an impossible 300 beats per minute before flatlining. Her brainwave activity dissolved into pure, chaotic static. "She's dead," a young technician stammered, his face ashen. Eris felt the floor drop out from under him, the familiar cold hand of failure gripping his heart. He had done it again. He had murdered someone in the name of progress. "From the observation deck," Rostova's voice crackled over the intercom, as cold and sharp as breaking ice. "Wait!" Eris looked up at the main neurological display. The static was gone. In its place was a single, coherent sine wave, a pattern of such perfect symmetry and high frequency that it defied all known biology. It was less a brainwave and more a broadcast signal. Lena's body relaxed, her head slumping forward, but she was not dead. A soft, ethereal blue light began to emanate from the network of veins in her arms and neck, a faint bioluminescence that pulsed in time with the wave on the screen. He was witnessing the rewriting of a human soul in real time. For 72 hours, Lena remained in that catatonic state, a living statue glowing with an unnatural inner light. Eris never left the lab, monitoring the cascade of changes sweeping through her body. The Chimera virus wasn't just activating psionic potential, it was rebuilding her from the cellular level up. Her neural pathways were reforging themselves into crystalline structures. Her cell regeneration accelerated to a point where minor cuts would heal in seconds. She was becoming something more, and something less than human. Eris felt a chilling sense of paternal terror. He had created her, and he had no idea what she was becoming. He was a father watching his child mutate into something he could neither understand nor control. Inside the silent prison of her own mind, Lena was drowning. The first wave of the virus had shattered her sense of self, splintering her consciousness into a million fractured memories and sensations. She was a child again, hiding in the rusty ventilation shafts of a Martian slum. She was a teenager, feeling the cold vacuum of space during a risky salvage operation. She was a prisoner, feeling the sterile bite of the needle in her arm. These moments played out simultaneously, an endless loop of a life she no longer recognized as her own. Then, the whispers began. They were not sounds, but feelings, impressions, leaking into her fractured mind from the outside world. She felt the technician's gnawing anxiety about his sick daughter back on Earth. She tasted the stale, bitter coffee on the breath of a security guard. She felt General Rostova's ambition, a solid, unyielding column of polished steel in a sea of lesser emotions. And most clearly of all, she felt Eris Thorne, His guilt was a suffocating fog, thick with the ghosts of past failures. His scientific curiosity was a sharp, painful light, dissecting her even in her coma. His fear for her was a tiny, warm ember that she clung to in the swirling chaos of her dissolving identity. She was no longer just Lena. She was an unwilling nexus of the thoughts and feelings of everyone around her. The virus had torn down the walls of her mind, and now the entire world was rushing in. She had no ego left to fight it, no sense of self to be overwhelmed. As Rostova had predicted, her mind did not break. It bent, it adapted. It began to weave these disparate threads of consciousness into a new kind of awareness. She was a receiver, an antenna, and slowly, painstakingly, she learned to tune the signal. On the third day, the blue light faded, and her eyes opened. They were the same color, but the intelligence behind them was ancient and vast. She looked directly at the one-way glass of the observation deck, her gaze passing over the technicians and guards and locking onto General Rostova. "The quarantine will fail in 94 days, Lena said, her voice a soft, melodic hum that carried with no apparent effort. "A Cathar asteroid, smaller than the others, is using the gravitational shadow of Phobos to mask its approach. It will bypass the minefield." A stunned silence filled both the lab and the observation deck. Rostova stared, her iron composure momentarily cracking to reveal a flicker of disbelief and awe. Eris felt a thrill of pure terror. She hadn't just heard Rostova's thoughts. She had sifted through the general's strategic concerns, accessed the fleet's sensor data through the general's own knowledge, processed it, and predicted an outcome that the Federation's most advanced quantum computers had missed. The next phase began immediately. Rostova, her gamble validated beyond her wildest expectations, pushed relentlessly. Lena was moved to a larger, more secure containment chamber, a sterile sphere of white alloy suspended in the center of a vast cavern by magnetic fields. Eris protested, arguing that she needed time to integrate, to learn control, to rediscover some semblance of humanity before they began treating her purely as a psychic sensor array. Rostova ignored him. To the general, Lena was no longer a person. She was System Chimera, an asset to be calibrated and deployed. The tests were brutal. They started small, asking her to identify hidden objects in other rooms, a task she accomplished with bored indifference. Then they moved to cracking encrypted data streams by having her simply look at the raw code until the solution presented itself in her mind. She broke the unbreakable, deciphering Cathar biosignatures from fragmented sensor readings that had been dismissed as background radiation. She was a miracle, a prodigy, and with every successful test, Eris could see the last vestiges of the scavenger from Mars slipping away, replaced by a being of calm, detached, and terrifying power. The true test came when they brought in the sample. It was a small fragment of Cathar fungus, recovered at great cost from an assimilated research outpost on Europa, now housed in a triple-layered stasis field in the center of Lena's chamber. "Tell us how to kill it," Rostova commanded over the intercom. Eris held his breath, his hand hovering over a failsafe that would flood the chamber with a neurotoxin. He remembered Valerius screaming as he was exposed to a hostile alien consciousness, his mind snapping like a dry twig. Lena didn't scream. She floated from the floor, her body held aloft by a subtle manipulation of the magnetic field, and drifted towards the stasis unit. She placed her hand on the cold surface of the outer field. The moment she made contact, the fungus inside, a sickly chartreuse mass, began to pulse with a vibrant green light. The technicians yelped as their consoles lit up with warnings. The sample's bioenergy output was surging, resonating with Lena's own psionic signature. "What are you feeling?" Eris asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Lena tilted her head, a strange, serene smile on her face. "It's lonely," she whispered, her voice filled with a profound and alien sadness. "It doesn't want to conquer. It doesn't hate. It's just hungry. It wants to connect, to share, to make everything part of its song." Eris felt his blood run cold. She wasn't fighting it. She was empathizing with it. "Lena, disconnect from it." "That's an order," Rostova snapped. But Lena didn't seem to hear. "The song is so simple," she continued, her eyes glowing with that soft blue light again. "One voice, singing in the dark. It just wants other voices to join it. It doesn't understand why we scream when it touches us." Inside the stasis field, a single, flower-like stalk grew from the fungal mass, unfurling its petals to reveal a cloud of shimmering green spores that pressed against the inside of the field, drawn to her touch. "Shut it down," Eris yelled. "Rostova, she's forming a symbiotic link. It's what happened to the colonists." But Rostova was transfixed, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "No," she breathed. "This is it. This is the weapon. If she can understand it, she can control it. She can turn the tide." Eris watched in horror as Lena's fingers twitched, and the stasis field around the sample flickered, its power fluctuating in time with her heartbeat. She wasn't just listening to the song, she was learning to sing it herself. The weapon was working. It was creating a mind that could interface with the Cathar, but in the process, it was creating a monster who saw the enemy not as a threat, but as a kindred spirit. Rostova had her savior, but Eris feared they had just given humanity's executioner the key to their own extinction. In her suspended chamber, miles beneath the Antarctic ice, Lena closed her eyes, ignoring the frantic voices of the men who thought they controlled her. She could feel the small, lonely piece of the hive mind in front of her, but for the first time, she reached her own consciousness out further, past the lab, past the Earth's atmosphere, out into the silent, waiting dark. And the dark sang back, a chorus of a billion voices, a single, unified consciousness adrift in the void between Mars and Jupiter, turned its vast, unblinking attention inward, and for the first time, noticed the faint, beautiful, and utterly new voice that had just joined its song. The incident in the containment chamber, which the technicians grimly dubbed the Serenade, fundamentally altered the nature of Project Chimera. Rostova, buoyed by what she saw as a monumental success, doubled down. The mission was no longer about finding a way to kill the Cathar. It was about co-opting them. Lena was to become the ultimate fifth columnist, a human queen for the alien hive. Eris, however, was plunged into a state of near-constant dread. He saw the truth with horrifying clarity. They hadn't created a weapon. They had built a bridge. And now, the entire Cathar consciousness was staring across it, beckoned by a mind it recognized as its own. He began working in secret, late at night when the other researchers were gone, creating a failsafe. It was a vicious piece of code, a psychic virus designed to be uploaded directly into Lena's neural architecture. If activated, it would cascade through her psionic pathways and induce a catastrophic, irreversible feedback loop, a mind killer. It was a kill switch for a god, a bullet for his own child, and every line of code he wrote felt like a betrayal. He prayed he would never have to use it, but the serene, detached look in Lena's eyes told him it was only a matter of time. Lena, for her part, had retreated into a world no one else could perceive. To the researchers, she was a quiet, compliant asset, performing her tasks with unnerving efficiency. She mapped the entirety of the Cathar's biological network in the Sol system, pinpointing every spore cluster and every major hive asteroid with an accuracy that was both miraculous and terrifying. She directed fleet movements, guiding patrol ships around invisible pockets of spores and identifying structural weaknesses in the organic asteroids that allowed Federation Marines to plant deep core plasma charges. For the first time in the war, humanity was scoring victories, small, tactical, but victories nonetheless. The silent advance of the green tide had been halted. A fragile stalemate settled over the system. But inside her mind, Lena was engaged in a far more complex and dangerous dance. The Cathar consciousness, the great song as she now called it, was no longer just a distant chorus. It was a presence, a personality of sorts, vast and ancient and achingly lonely. It spoke to her in images and emotions, in feelings of cosmic cold and the slow, patient hunger of geology. It showed her galaxies it had consumed, entire species it had absorbed into its harmonious whole. It did not see this as destruction. It saw it as union, as an end to the painful, chaotic dissonance of individual consciousness. It offered her a place in its eternal choir, a chance to shed the fleeting, fragile shell of her humanity and become part of something infinite. Lena did not accept, but she did not refuse. She listened. She learned. She walked the labyrinthine corridors of a mind larger than a solar system, a silent spy in a war that had become far more intimate than anyone on Earth could imagine. She learned its fears, the terror of true silence, of absolute solitude. She learned its desires, the yearning for complexity, for new melodies to add to its endless song. And she discovered its great secret. The one thing the Federation's science could never have revealed the Cathar were not the original singers. They were merely the chorus. They served a conductor, a central, a primordial intelligence that they worshipped with every fiber of their being, a being they called the Source. This source was not in the Sol system. It was somewhere else, somewhere deep in the interstellar void, and the part of the hive that had invaded human space was merely a single, exploratory tendril. The stalemate broke on the 94th day, just as Lena had predicted. The stealth asteroid, a chunk of organic rock the size of a small city, slipped past the Martian quarantine and began a slow, inexorable descent toward Earth. The fleet, forewarned by Lena, was waiting for it. The battle that followed was the largest and most desperate in human history. Warships hammered the asteroid with everything they had, their plasma cannons and kinetic rails scarring its pitted, living surface. But the Cathar consciousness was no longer a passive force. Guided by its new awareness of human tactics, an awareness gleaned from its constant, silent conversation with Lena, it adapted. Spore clouds, previously dispersed at random, were now fired with tactical precision, targeting the engines and bridge sections of the Federation ships. The asteroid's surface cracked and reformed, growing organic shields to absorb the worst of the impacts. The battle was a bloody, brutal affair. Dozens of ships were lost, their crews either vaporized or, worse, assimilated, their last moments broadcast as a wave of silent, panicked terror that Lena felt as a physical blow in her Antarctic chamber. She was the fulcrum of the entire conflict. In her mind, she was a battlefield. One part of her was coolly directing the human fleet, pointing out vulnerabilities in the hive's defenses as they appeared. Another part of her was receiving the hive's own battle plans, feeling its pain as ships were destroyed, its rage, its confusion. It couldn't understand why its new voice, this beautiful, complex melody it had found, was hurting it. The strain was immense. Blood began to trickle from her nose and ears. The machines monitoring her vitals shrieked warnings that Eris and his team frantically tried to manage. He could see her mind fracturing under the impossible pressure of serving two masters in a war against itself. He had to stop it. He reached for the failsafe, his fingers hovering over the activation key for the psychic virus. "Don't," a voice whispered in his mind. It wasn't Lena's soft hum. It was sharper, clearer. The voice of the scavenger she had once been, a ghost in her own machine. "Wait, I have a plan." Eris froze, his heart pounding. Was it really her, or was it a trick? A final, desperate gambit by the consciousness that was consuming her through the observation glass. He saw Lena's head snap up. Her eyes, now glowing with a brilliant, almost blinding blue light, were fixed on the tactical display showing the battle raging in high orbit. "The asteroid isn't the weapon," she said, her voice now a strange fusion of her own and the hive's resonant hum. "It's a messenger. It's a cocoon." On the screen, the asteroid, heavily damaged and trailing plumes of green vapor, ignored the attacking ships and angled its descent. It wasn't aiming for a city or a military base. Its target was the Pacific Ocean. "It's not here to spread spores," Lena explained, a tremor of discovery in her voice. "It's here to plant a seed. It's trying to replicate the source on Earth, to create a new conductor." Rostovaz's voice, tight with fury, cut through the intercom. "Then destroy it, Commander. Concentrate all fire. Do not let it reach the surface." But it was too late. The asteroid plunged into the atmosphere, its organic shell blazing from the friction. The remaining Federation ships fired their last volleys, but they couldn't stop its momentum. It hit the ocean with the force of 1,000 nuclear bombs, sending a tsunami of apocalyptic scale racing towards the coastlines of Asia and the Americas. The impact itself was not the true cataclysm, as the superheated rock sank into the abyssal depths of the Marianas Trench. It began to dissolve, but it wasn't dying. It was birthing something deep beneath the waves, in the crushing dark. A new consciousness began to stir, a nascent god awakening in the cradle of its new home. Lena screamed, a raw, human sound of pure agony that shattered the monitors in her chamber. The feedback from the birth of the new source was too much. The bridge she had formed with the Cathar became a conduit for a psychic shockwave of unimaginable power. Eris watched in horror as she collapsed, her body convulsing, the blue light in her eyes extinguishing like a dying star. Soy. The Cathar hive in the Sol system, its connection to its new god severed at the moment of its birth, fell into chaos. Its tactical coherence vanished. The remaining ships in spore clouds went dormant, drifting aimlessly. Humanity had won the battle for Earth, but the price was devastating. The tsunami would reshape the world, killing billions. And Lena, their only weapon, was broken, possibly lost forever in the silent, screaming labyrinth of her own shattered mind. As the emergency medical teams rushed into the chamber to stabilize Lena's body, Eris Thorne looked at the blank, lifeless expression on her face. He had failed. He hadn't protected her. He hadn't just created a monster. He had allowed it to be sacrificed. And as he looked at the global map displaying the projected path of the tsunami, he knew the war wasn't over. A far more dangerous, intelligent, and focused enemy now lay sleeping in the darkest depths of their own world, and the one person who could have spoken to it, who could have understood it, was gone. The world did not end in fire, but in water and silence. The great tsunami, a wall of churning gray ocean a kilometer high, remade the continental maps in a matter of hours. Billions died, not in the quick, clean flash of a plasma bolt, but drowned in the sudden, violent reclamation of the seas. For those who survived, huddled in the high-altitude interior cities or on the few remaining orbital stations, a new kind of silence descended. It was the silence of a world holding its breath, the silence of 6 billion severed connections. The global infinite was a phantom limb, twitching with dead links and ghost signals. Humanity was reduced to a collection of terrified islands, both literal and metaphorical, and in the center of it all, General Rostova stood in the Antarctic Command Center, the master of a broken kingdom. Her victory was a Pyrrhic masterpiece. She had saved the species from assimilation only to watch it be decimated by geology. The Cathar hive was a neutered threat, its ships and spore clouds drifting in orbit like a celestial graveyard. But Rostova knew the true enemy was now nestled in the deepest trench of their own planet, growing, learning, and waiting. In the medical wing of the menagerie, Lena was the epicenter of that silence. She lay on a biobed, her body kept alive by machines, her face a serene, empty mask. The brilliant blue light in her eyes was gone, leaving them looking like dull, unpolished stones. Her mind, once a nexus of cosmic awareness, was a wasteland. Eris Thorn rarely left her side, his guilt a physical presence that hunched his shoulders and hollowed his eyes. He had created this, pushed her past the brink, and stood by as Rostova's ambition used her as a psychic battering ram. He would run scans, endless neurological maps that showed him nothing but chaos. Her mind was a shattered mirror, a billion pieces reflecting nothing. She was lost in there, and he was the one who had drawn the faulty map that led her astray. The first reports were dismissed as mass hysteria, the predictable psychological fallout from an apocalypse. Survivors in the Andes Federation started speaking of the whispers, a faint, melodic hum on the edge of hearing that seemed to coax them toward the newly formed coastline. In the orbital habitat, Haven, people began walking out of airlocks without suits, their faces beatific and calm. Suicides spiked globally, but they weren't acts of despair. The victims left notes filled with ecstatic prose about rejoining the sea and hearing the new song. Rostova's analysts, what was left of them, classified it as planetary-scale PTSD. Eris knew better. He synced the geographical locations of the incidents with seismic sensors he had placed around the Marianas Trench. The pattern was undeniable. Each cluster of Whispers incidents was preceded by a deep, ultra-low-frequency pulse from the trench, a psychic ripple expanding from the nascent source. It wasn't attacking. It was beckoning. The first Cathar hive had been a hungry, lonely singer looking for a chorus. This new one, born of Earth's own biosphere and the psychic trauma of a human mind, was different. It was a shepherd, gently calling its flock home. It didn't need spores to assimilate people. It was learning to rewrite their minds from a distance, using the shared grief and trauma of the survivors as a transmission medium. It was an infection of the soul. "It's smarter than the first one," Eris told Rostova in the silent war room, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. He pointed to a map glowing on the hollow table, red dots of psychic phenomena blooming like a plague. The original hive was a blunt instrument. This thing, it's a surgeon. It's not conquering us, it's seducing us. It's offering an escape from pain. And right now, pain is all we have left. We can't fight it with ships or guns. How do you declare war on an emotion? Rostova stared at the map, her face grim. We need her back. Eris, we need a translator. We need to know what that thing wants." "She's gone," Eris said, the words tasting like ash. "Her consciousness is fragmented. Trying to force a connection now would be like trying to reassemble a shattered glass by shaking the pieces in a box. We don't even know if Lena is still in there." "Then find her," Rostova commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Whatever it takes. Use your theories, your forbidden science. I am giving you unlimited resources. Build whatever you need to build, but you will dive into that chaos and you will bring my weapon back online. That is an order." For the next month, Eris worked with a manic, obsessive energy. He transformed Lena's former containment chamber into a new kind of laboratory. In the center, he constructed a neural interface cradle, a terrifying device of wires, gel conduits, and crystalline processors. It was a machine designed to bridge two minds, but one of those minds was a psychic wasteland. A direct link would be suicide. It would be like plugging his own brain into a supernova. He needed a key, a program that could navigate the storm of Lena's broken psyche and shield him from the worst of it. And he had one. The Mind Killer, the psychic virus he had designed as her kill switch. His ultimate betrayal could, ironically, be her only hope for salvation. The theory was insane. A shot in the absolute dark. The virus was designed to target and destroy coherent psionic pathways. In a healthy mind, it would be a weapon of mass destruction. But in Lena's shattered mind, where rogue memories and alien echoes caromed like shrapnel, Eris hypothesized the virus could act as a targeted degausser. It wouldn't heal her, but it might be able to erase the noise. It could prune the broken branches of her consciousness, clearing away the Cathar echoes and the psychic trauma, hopefully leaving the core of her original self, the ghost of the scavenger, intact. It was the neurological equivalent of trying to cure a patient by setting off a bomb in the hospital and hoping it only destroyed the cancer cells. The day of the dive, as the technicians called it. The air in the menagerie was thick with the tension of a bomb disposal squad. Eris lay in a cradle parallel to Lena's, the cold gel of the neural interface sending shivers down his spine. Rostova watched from the observation deck, her expression unreadable. "If my brainwave activity flatlines for more than 60 seconds, you pull the plug. No heroics," Eris instructed the lead technician, his voice tight. The technician nodded numbly. Eris looked over at Lena's still form. "All right, kid," he whispered. "I'm coming in. Try not to kill me." He gave the signal, and the world dissolved into a screech of white noise and blinding light. He was falling. He was adrift in an ocean of pure, unstructured thought. He saw Lena's memories, not as coherent scenes, but as weaponized fragments. The taste of synthetic rations in a Martian slum was a razor blade on his tongue. The terror of a near-fatal hull breach during a salvage run was a crushing weight on his chest. He felt her defiance against the Federation guards. Her fear as the needle pierced her skin, and woven through it all was the overwhelming, crushing presence of the great song. The Cathar consciousness was a storm on the horizon of her mind, a tempest of alien loneliness and hunger that had eroded the shores of her sanity. Eris fought to stay sane, to hold on to his own identity as the tide of her broken mind threatened to pull him under. He was a swimmer in a hurricane, and the only thing he could do was navigate by the one landmark he had created, the psychic virus. He activated the program. A construct of black, crystalline code materialized in the psychic chaos. A search and destroy algorithm in a world of pure thought. It began its work immediately, targeting the most powerful, most chaotic psionic signatures, the echoes of the Cathar hive, and annihilating them. Each time one was destroyed, the storm lessened. The psychic pressure eased. He was clearing a path through the wreckage of her mind, following the faintest trail of memories that felt truly her, the glint of scavenged metal, the grim satisfaction of a successful barter, the fierce, stubborn will to simply survive. He found her huddled in a memory of a ventilation shaft, a construct of her childhood self, curled up and hiding from the storm. The ghost of Lena, the scavenger, looked up at him, her eyes wide with a terror that was entirely human. "You have to wake up," Aris projected, his own mental voice weak and strained. "There's a new song, and it's calling to everyone. We need you to hear it for us." The child construct shook her head, pulling her knees to her chest. "It hurts to listen." "I know," Aris said, his own guilt a painful throb in his consciousness. "But you're the only one who can. You're the only one strong enough." He held out a hand, and as the last of the Cathar echoes were purged by his virus, the storm finally broke. The chaos receded, leaving behind a vast, silent, and scarred mental landscape. The child construct looked at his outstretched hand, and for the first time, a flicker of the old, defiant intelligence returned to her eyes. She took his hand. In the lab, Lena's body convulsed on the biobed. Her vital signs, which had been erratic, suddenly stabilized. A low moan escaped her lips. Eris's own body went rigid. The technician's hand shot toward the emergency disconnect. "Wait!" Rostova commanded, her voice sharp. On the bed, Lena's eyes slowly fluttered open, and the dullness was gone. In its place was a blue so deep and clear it looked like a window into the void. She sat up, her movements fluid, and looked directly at the observation window, past Rostova, past the technicians, her gaze fixed on something infinitely distant. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was a perfect, clear, and terrifyingly calm whisper. "It's not a shepherd," she said, her words silencing the entire facility. "It's a lighthouse. It's not trying to gather the flock. It's guiding the storm." Eris, still connected, felt the full weight of her meaning flood his mind. A wave of cold, cosmic dread that was infinitely worse than the chaos he had just navigated. The new source wasn't a colonist. It was a beacon, and its light was a signal. A call across the unfathomable darkness of interstellar space. A declaration to the true, hidden masters of the Kera race. The message was simple: a new world was ready for harvest. The silence in the war room was a new and terrible thing. It was not the silence of a lost signal or a dead world. It was the silence of comprehension. The sound of a species fully grasping the scale of its own insignificance. The Cathar were not the storm. They were the first raindrops. Lena's revelation had shattered their last, desperate hopes. They had not been fighting a war for survival. They had been ringing a dinner bell for forces that could unmake reality with a thought. Rostova was the first to recover. Her mind, forged in the crucible of impossible choices, immediately recalibrating to the new, catastrophic reality. The predatory gleam returned to her eyes, harder and brighter than before. "A beacon," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned stillness. "A lighthouse guides ships. It can be used to guide them to port, or it can be used to guide them into the rocks. Thorn, what would it take to get her to the source Eris, who had just disconnected from the neural interface and was staggering back from the brink of Lena's mind, stared at the general in horror. "You can't be serious. You want to send her into the heart of that thing. We don't know what it is, what it could do to her." "She is the only one who can do anything," Rostova countered, her fist slamming down on the hollow table, causing the red dots of the whispers to shimmer. "That thing is broadcasting a signal. Lena is the only one who can get close enough to change the broadcast. We are going to turn its come and get us signal into a warning. We will make this planet seem so toxic, so dangerous, that its masters will pass us by for easier prey. It was a plan born of pure, distilled desperation, a gamble on a scale that dwarfed everything that had come before. Eris saw the fatal flaw immediately. To do that, she would have to interface directly with it, synchronize with a consciousness that shattered her from halfway across the planet. It would destroy her. Rostova, what's left of her humanity, would be burned away, and that's the best-case scenario. The worst case is that it consumes her and uses her knowledge of us to make the signal even more enticing. It's a risk I am willing to take, Rostova stated, her gaze like flint. From her bio-bed, Lena turned her head, her deep blue eyes fixing on the general. It is a risk I am willing to take, she corrected, her voice calm and absolute. There was no fear in it, only a profound, weary certainty. The argument was over before it began. The journey to the Marianas Trench was humanity's last pilgrimage. They used the Hades, a deep-sea exploration vehicle retrofitted for a purpose its designers could never have conceived. It was a tiny, claustrophobic sphere of reinforced alloy, a single lifeboat on an ocean of impending doom. There were only 3 passengers: Lena, the nascent god; Eris, her creator and reluctant jailer, who refused to let her go alone; and a grizzled, taciturn pilot who knew the mission was a one-way trip but didn't seem to care. As the Hades descended, leaving the world of sunlight and air behind, the pressure outside was mirrored by the suffocating tension within. Rostova's plan was simple and brutal. Eris was to monitor Lena's neural state. The moment she established a stable link with the source, he was to upload a modified version of his psychic virus, not the mind killer, but a corruption file, a mimetic plague designed to piggyback on the beacon signal. It would broadcast an illusion of a world already harvested, a system picked clean and left barren, a psychic scorched earth policy. It was a desperate, elegant, and monstrous idea. Eris clutched the datapad containing the virus, feeling its profane weight. He was once again being asked to violate Lena's mind, to turn his science into a weapon against her very soul. In the deepening gloom of the submersible, Lena was serene. She was no longer the frightened scavenger or the detached psychic asset. She was something new, something whole. "It won't work," she said softly, her voice a quiet hum that seemed to push back against the groaning of the hull. Eris looked up, his heart sinking. "The virus, their plan," she clarified, her blue eyes reflecting the faint light of the instrument panel. "Rostova thinks like a human. She thinks in terms of deception, of projecting weakness to avoid a fight. The masters of the song are not conquerors. They are not predators. They are perfectionists. They are drawn to dissonance, to the chaos of individual consciousness, the way a composer is drawn to an unresolved chord. They do not seek to destroy it, but to resolve it, to force it into their harmony. A signal of a dead world would not repel them. It would be a mystery, an imperfection in the score of the universe that they would be compelled to investigate and correct." Eris felt a cold dread that was deeper and darker than the abyss outside. "Then what do we do?" Lena turned her gaze from him to the forward viewport, where the first faint, bioluminescent glow of the source was becoming visible in the crushing dark. "You don't fight a song with silence," she whispered. "You fight it with a better song." They found it at the bottom of the world. It was not a creature or a structure, but a geological event of impossible beauty and horror, a vast, crystalline lattice, miles in diameter, had grown out from the sea floor, pulsing with a soft, internal, chartreuse light. It was a living brain of crystal and energy, and its thoughts were the low, resonant hum that was driving the world mad. The Hades drew closer, a mote of dust before a living god. The pilot, his duty done, slumped in his chair, a peaceful smile on his face as the whispers finally claimed him. "It's time," Lena said. She stood and placed her hand on the cold inner hull of the submersible. Eris saw the deep blue light return to her eyes, more intense than ever before. He saw the crystalline patterns of her own reforged neural pathways become visible under her skin, mirroring the lattice outside. This was it, Rostova's order, his final, terrible duty. He raised the data pad, his thumb hovering over the activation key for the corruption virus. "I'm sorry, Lena," he breathed, tears blurring his vision. She turned to him, and for a fleeting, heartbreaking instant, he saw the ghost of the scavenger from Mars in her eyes, the fierce, defiant, cornered animal. She gave him a small, sad smile. "I know, but you taught me something. Eris, you taught me that even in the most broken things, there can be a purpose. You used your poison to heal me. Now, let me use theirs to save us." Before he could react, she reached out, not with her hand, but with her mind. Eris felt a gentle, irresistible pressure, and the data pad slipped from his grasp. A wave of pure, calming psionic energy washed over him, and his fear, his guilt, his desperation were momentarily silenced. He was an observer now, a witness to the end of an age. Lena closed her eyes, and the submersible groaned as an unimaginable force pressed in on it from all sides. She wasn't just connecting to the source. She was pulling it into herself, absorbing its vast consciousness, its direct line to the masters of the void. And then she began to sing. On the surface, toy, in the Antarctic Command Center, the tactical map went insane. The red dots of the whispers vanished. In their place, a single, brilliant blue light emanated from the Marianas Trench, a wave of psionic energy that washed over the entire planet in a second. It was not a call to death. It was a feeling of profound peace, of connection, of purpose. Every survivor on Earth felt it. The grief, the fear, the trauma. It didn't disappear, but it was soothed, placed into a context so vast and eternal that it no longer had the power to break them. They were no longer screaming individuals. They were notes in a new, quiet, and uniquely human harmony. In the depths of interstellar space, the storm felt it. The conductors of the great song, the perfectionists drawn by the chaotic noise of humanity, suddenly heard the signal from the Sol system change. The frantic, dissonant chord had been resolved. It had not been silenced, but transformed into a new and complex harmony they had never heard before. A song of sorrow and resilience, of individuality and unity, all held in a perfect yet stable balance. It was no longer a world to be fixed. It was a finished piece. And so, the storm passed by, seeking other, more discordant melodies in the endless night. Eris awoke hours later. The Hades was on the surface, bobbing gently in a calm, unnaturally placid Pacific Ocean. Lena was gone. Of the source, there was no sign. He was alone. Humanity was saved. But the cost was absolute. Lena had not destroyed the source or deceived its masters. She had become the new source. She had absorbed the alien consciousness and rewritten it with her own, infusing it with the stubborn, defiant, and compassionate soul of a human scavenger. She hadn't silenced the song. She had given it a human voice. The whispers were gone, But a new kind of silence had taken their place. It was the quiet of a world at peace, a world gently, benevolently, and permanently cradled in the mind of a silent god who lived in the deep places of the earth. Eris Thorn eventually returned to his observatory in the Kuiper Belt, a voluntary exile once more. He would spend his days charting the silent stars, and he no longer felt alone. He could feel her sometimes, a faint, warm pressure at the back of his mind, a feeling of being watched over, of being part of something larger. Humanity had survived. They rebuilt, slowly, quietly, without the frantic, chaotic energy that had once defined them. They were at peace. Rostova had her weapon, a shield that would protect their world for eternity. Eris had saved his child, but in doing so, had lost her to a heaven of her own making. And in the silent depth, Lena, the girl who was once no one, sang her beautiful, lonely, and triumphant song, the eternal and unwavering guardian of a fragile, quiet, and finally harmonious earth.